Well, thank you so much for coming today to managing local tax records. I want to thank uh, Tax Department PVR for inviting VSARA to present to you today. My name is Megan Wheaton Book. I work for the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. And I have with me on the call today my colleague, Steve Picasio. Steve, do you want to? Yeah.
Hi,
Oh, you're muted.
sorry, my name is Steve Picasio. I'm a Records Management Information Management Specialist at VSARA as well, and I work a lot with municipal officials on their records retention questions.
So as it's always nice to know where we're headed in a webinar, we thought we'd start by kind of going through an overview of records and information management in the state of Vermont, talking about some benefits of record keeping, like why would I want to do this? What's in it for me? And then how to build record keeping into your day-to-day work. But before we do that, I am going to hand it back over to Steve for a quick update on the Vermont Local Records Program.
Thank you. So the Vermont Local Records Program is intended to assist local governments in meeting their record keeping requirements through ongoing collaboration and contact with stakeholder organizations. This includes development and implementation of justifiable and defensible record retention schedules, as well as policies that meet the obligations of municipalities. And we also offer targeted educational opportunities for municipal officials so that they learn how to efficiently and sustainably manage municipal records moving forward into the future. So some of the programs that we offer, we do targeted assistance for specific office holders. So that would be listers and assessors in this case. We do in-person and virtual consultations. So we are happy to meet with you one-on-one to answer your questions. We are just rolling out a program we're calling Lunch and Learns, where we're going to do brief 1-hour trainings on specific record keeping questions that you may have. So if anything, any ideas come up that you want to put forward for a Lunch and Learn idea, let us know. We have monthly open houses here at the State Archives, and we also visit conferences as well.
Great, thanks, Steve. Okay. So again, we thought that it would be great to start today's conversation by grounding it in some basic records management from Vermont. So before diving into our best practices and statutes, we thought we would start with this particular statute, which is Title I of the Vermont Statutes Annotated, Section 317, which basically says that a public record is any written or recorded information, regardless of form or characteristics, which is produced or acquired in the course of agency business. So that means emails, physical files, databases, your files in a SharePoint site or Teams or Google, even this presentation. These are all examples of public records. Additionally, our statutes set forth an overarching expectation that public records will be managed systematically or through a planned and structured manner to provide ready access to vital information, promote the efficient and economical operation of government, and to preserve their legal, administrative, and informational value. Statute's really clear that we must retain our public records unless we're specifically authorized by a law or an approved record schedule to destroy them or give them away. And some of those resources are record schedules. I feel like my slide deck's not quite right. Record schedules are high-level policies issued by the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration and approved by the state archivist. They consolidate all our record-keeping requirements into one resource, and they act as a governance document for full life cycle management and retention and disposition of public records. VSARA is required to create these under Title III of Vermont Statutes Annotated, Section 117. So why would we want to do some records management? They improve our operations and business functions, allowing us to know what information is needed and why. Records and information management helps us minimize our legal risks by complying with state and federal laws. It helps decrease our retrieval and response time for public records if we have a public records request. And it ensures that we're getting the right information to the right people at the right time. Overall, records management behaviors will reduce your unnecessary costs. And so that we can use resources that, maybe originally we targeted for added storage space, and instead giving that to staff. If you're not sure, I don't know if how many of you maybe have tried to argue to a select board or your town manager that you need to build a larger office, but that usually doesn't go over very well. So records management can actually help you meet your needs without having to go through those extra hoops. So now that we have a legal definition of records and information management, and you all know 100% that you want to do records management, we're going to move into how to build out your record keeping program with tools and resources and a suggested workflow just to get you started. When I started giving this presentation, I had a very lovely lady call me afterwards and ask me to send her what I call the record keeping toolkit. And I had to apologize to her profusely because I have to be really upfront. These are all resources that you pull together yourself, and you can really make it meet your office's specific needs. There are 4 major components of a record keeping program that make it successful. You've got high-level governance documents like the VSARA record schedules, and those act as your foundation. Then you have implementation-focused resources that are more sort of your recipes for how to do record keeping on a regular basis. At the top, wow, these are I have to apologize. My notes are all over the place. Then we have our procedures and guides that are really going to help your staff understand what the day-to-day expectations are, followed by training, which everyone needs to know what the expectation is and where to get help. So there are 2 different types of retention guidance that you can focus on for how to retain your records. And that's the general record schedules. These are issued for functions that are common to multiple agencies. And then there are disposition orders. Disposition orders were issued by the Public Records Division, which is the predecessor organization for the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. And we are slowly trying to phase these out. There are a few tax-specific record schedules that I want to point out to you guys, since that's your main area of focus: tax assessments and tax appeals. I'm actively working on updating the legal requirements underpinning both of these schedules. Once that's happened, we will be issuing out specifically to listers on our website these 2 record schedules. So you only have to go to one link that says listers on the Secretary of State's website, and you will get access to the relevant record schedules for your office. This is something that Deanna specifically has been advocating for a long time, and we're going to make this happen for you guys. The tax assessment schedule is more aligned to the work of the listers. The appeals schedule is more focused on the grievance process of the BCA. And then I also have a link on the screen to the general record schedules if you happen to have other types of records that you might be wondering how to manage. Some folks have budget records, some folks have what we call transitory records. So it's a nice resource. I definitely recommend using that link. If you've never seen a record schedule, this is what they look like. At the top in the first purple bubble box is the classification and the title of the schedule. So you know that you're in the right place. We have a GRS, I can't read that, 1570.1170. And then we have the human readable version, which is tax assessments and related records. Underneath, in italics, we have an overview of what's covered by the schedule. And then we have what we like to call the retention directive, which if you wanted a nice high-level summary of what the schedule means, you're going to see that underneath under the retention area. And then we have a bunch of columns down at the bottom. The first column tells you what type of record we're talking about. So we've highlighted agreements for this slide. And then we have a use and applicability area. So it's just a nice description of what we mean by that term. And then jumping all the way over to the far end, we give you what the life cycle management needs to be. What's the retention? So for tax assessments, we expect that agreements might be part of this process. And if you have them, you're going to be retaining those until they expire, meaning the agreement is no longer in effect, plus an additional 3 years. And then you can destroy those through shredding. Okay. For functions that are unique to municipalities, some disposition orders, if they were issued, can still be used. This is only because VSARA develops record schedules when we're specifically requested and have a partner, and also in cooperation with that public agency. So if listers would feel like there's a gap in their record schedules that need to be addressed, reach out to us. We need that request, so you can reach out to Steve, and he will get you onto the waiting list. And then we would need some happy people who wanted to give feedback and tell us about their work. So if you haven't seen a disposition order, they are on our website still, and you can see this is what one looks like. At the very top, you have number 9881. That's the disposition order number. And then underneath you have who it's been issued to. So in this case, all town clerks listers. And you have a description of what records are covered. CR plus, I think, 7 on the screen. I'm very sorry, it's very small, is creation plus 7. So these disposition orders have from the beginning of the creation of that record until it's no longer available. Record schedules look at it more from when does that record become inactive, and then it becomes eligible for destruction. So there are 2 different types of retention guidance that you can look to, for how to retain town records. So my notes are completely wrong. So electronic records management is inclusive of what is covered by general records schedules, meaning that if a town decides they want to move into electronic record keeping, unless there's something in statute that says this has to be a physical paper, they can make that choice. Your records management policy, any of your retention and disposition information just needs to be consistent. So again, as long as there's nothing in statute saying you can't have this in an electronic format, You can make that choice, but it's a choice. You could also decide we're not ready for that. It depends on your needs, what the capabilities of the town are. But if you are creating electronic records, you want to make sure that they are also being covered by your records management policy and you're disposing of them appropriately. So in addition to the schedules and disposition orders, you may want to add a few other resources like what I've got on the screen to your toolkit. There's the Building and General Services contract through the state with Secure Shred, and that's available to municipalities. The last time I checked in on this, municipalities could, if they wanted to, have Secure Shred come quarterly. I think it comes out to about $140. And if anyone needs BGS's contact info, let us know. And that way you're not, shoving individual pieces of paper through your tiny shredder in the office. They'll bring a huge 64-gallon trash bin that locks, and you can just call them when you're ready. It's really simple and straightforward. VSARA also has a number of best practices and standards on scanning and imaging records to deal with information security, and how to move into electronic file formats and that kind of thing. So that link is also on the screen. You can incorporate these best practices, this secure shred, regular shredding, into policies and procedures that are going to act as cheat sheets for how staff will store your records and when and how to destroy or preserve them. For those of you that may not have a records management policy, we're just going to take a pause and talk a bit more about what a policy might need to include and where to find an example. VSARA likes to highlight the 5 areas on the screen to ensure that your policy is really clear in case your town citizens want to know what you're doing. So we recommend having a purpose statement to identify that the listers or assessors have records management goals and what they are. We're going to have a scope statement that defines what's covered in your records management policy. It's going to identify the major laws, standards, or procedures that you're going to follow. It's going to list any record schedules that the town is going to use, or specifically just the listers or assessors, and then a guideline for how to implement the policy and what procedures you might need to have. On the screen now, this is an example policy that we created with, I believe, the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association a few years ago. And you can visit the link on the screen to download a template copy and tweak it for your town's needs. Or you can email Steve.
Actually, Megan,
And-
I believe that this document, along with the other PDF that we created with Barb, was sent out to the Comp 60 listserv this morning. So they should already have it. But again, if you don't, sounds like Steve will be more than happy to send it to you.
Yes. Awesome. Perfect. So you already have this resource. It really is something that you could open up, tweak it, make sure that it's actually doing and representative of what your town is doing so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're not doing anything crazy at this point. So next, we're talking about procedures, and this is just an example from the Secretary of State's office that I wanted to highlight. So we're talking about transitory record schedules, and you can see that we've included the general schedule number at the top. That's one thing that's necessary in order to be compliant with statute, is that we're pointing to an existing record schedule issued by the state archivist. And one thing to note about these general record schedules is that if your office has decided to adopt them, the requirements have to match, and you can't go below the retention requirement issued on the schedule. So For example, if you've got the general schedule and you've decided you want to keep your accounting records for 10 years, that's fine. I don't recommend it, but that's fine if your town has that need. What you can't do, because this accounting schedule says 3 years for its accounting records, you can't go underneath that. You can't go below it. A records management guideline, like the one on the screen, can be attached to your records management policy and used to help jumpstart your rollout and implementation. What you guys were sent in the handouts that Deanna and Terry shared earlier is what's on the screen now. So we worked with Deanna and Barb, and Christy even helped, and we created this example procedure. We like this because it's providing a very clear direction on example records, where they're physically located, as well as what record schedule and the timeframes that are expected to happen. The location column, I love this one because if you are about to have an impending disaster, like let's say Irene happens again, we think that we're going to get major flooding in your area. You can prioritize moving certain records, or if you had, a fire or something like that, ahead of time, you could work with your fire department and let them know, okay, these records right here in this location are top priority. Please don't just completely drench them if you don't have to. This will help save your records if they can. So even though we worked with PVR on this resource, it may not be inclusive of everything in your office. And you may have additional business requirements or needs that causes an extended retention. If you receive or reasonably expect a lawsuit or any kind of litigation over any of your records, you need to hold on to them. So if you get something from an attorney that says, we are going to bring you to court, this is on pause. You can't get rid of those records until the litigation ends or is no longer possible. So you're beyond that statute of limitations. The keys here to implementing an office-wide record keeping program is, while your record schedules are essential, they're only setting forth the basic requirements of what are the administrative, legal, and record keeping things that need to be met. Instead, we're recommending that the key to meeting your records management obligations and complying with state laws is having a holistic records management program with written procedures and policies and training for all of your staff that's inclusive of everything. So paper and electronic records. In order to get your record keeping policies and procedures and training, you need to know what you have. So I'm going to move into sort of a roadmap of how to get started. I did see some questions in the chat, so I just wanted to pause. So this PowerPoint presentation, I'm more than happy to send it out to Deanna and Terry, and they can share it out with you guys on the listserv. And then if someone appeals evaluation but then withdraws, are we required to keep withdrawn information? Steve, can you look into that? Okay, we will come back to that after this. Okay, so my first recommendation for getting started with record keeping is you're going to want to create a list of your storage areas. This is about getting your mind wrapped around all of the stuff that you have. So you're going to start small. You're going to tackle piles of records when you have the time, and you're going to write down an overview of pretty much everything that you have in that pile or that area. This can be as detailed and specific as you need it to be. If you only want to go down to the level of, this is the 2022 appraisal, that's fine. If you want to get more nuanced, great. But if you have an idea of what's in that area, it's going to be easier to make decisions about how long to keep them. So don't forget about your electronic records. You've got computers, you've got hard drives, sometimes you have external hard drives, you've got CDs, there's servers, some people are in the cloud. You've also got contracted software, hardware, and storage. So don't forget about figuring out what's in those storage locations too. Once you've created your big list, that's when I'd like you to keep an eye out for potential themes. So do you have multiple areas that are holding appraisal information? Are you gearing up for your townwide reappraisal, and it's going to be a big one, and so you want to find all of the places that have the previous ones? So you're going to keep an eye out for potential commonalities, and then rearrange your list so that records with the same idea or this related to the same topic are all together, even if they're still in different locations. You just want to kind of know that these are all the spots that I have to look for this kind of thing. So you've got your list. Before you're really getting into physically reorganizing anything, maybe now's a good time to pause and talk with the other listers or assessors in your area or in your office, and think about what's the best way to organize this so that more than just me, more than one person can actually identify it. So are you going to organize your stuff by name, by year, by parcel location? Are you going to use all of those? Is there something else that you wanted to makes more sense? Once you've made that distinction, if you can, because space is limited, if it's possible, physically relocate your similar records together so that you're reducing the amount of time that you've got to, walk upstairs 4 flights and then come back down to go into the basement just to find all of the records that are related to this one topic. Once you have it organized, you're going to move into that real world, right? And relabel your records. Some folks really like to have color coding. It makes it a lot easier for them to know it's green so it can go at the end of the year. It makes it faster for them, makes them feel more confident. So I know one town used those little colored dots on their files or their filing cabinets to let them know what retention should be. I know of one town where they actually created like 3x5 sticky labels on a printer and individually labeled every folder with the expected retention dates and the general schedule that they were using for them. That's a little intense. Not everybody has that amount of time, but if that's going to be useful for you, great, go for it. These are all options out there. So on the screen, we have that example inventory again, which includes when to dispose of those records. And then some towns add to this resource a log of when records are destroyed. That is not required. VSARA does not require that. The state does not require it. But some towns do find it's helpful to know what's in your office and what's gone if you get a public records request. So if you get a lot of frequent flyers who are really very focused on what it is that you're doing, it may make sense for you to have a log of, on this date, Secure Shred came and they destroyed this number of boxes, and generally we had, this information in those boxes. That might be useful for you. Once you've pulled together your toolkit of resources, you need to share that information with other town staff. When new listers come on board, You're going to want to go over your policies and procedures on when to move records out. Otherwise, all of this work that you've put into it is going to be on you. Record keeping is so much easier when it's a shared responsibility. Is it possible that your town clerk is already using Secure Shred or already has a policy that you could get in on? And then when they start to do some records management stuff, maybe you could too. Or if you're out sick, it's always nice to have a backup, even if it's just a, hey, I know where that policy is. I can help the next person, you know. It's always a wonderful idea to think that we're gonna win the lottery and then you know, move to, I don't know, Vancouver, but it's not likely. But on the off chance that you're not there to help the next person, if you've told somebody else it's actively in your office, it'll make things easier on them. And don't you wish that somebody had given you this when you started, so you didn't have to build all this from scratch? So before we end this portion, I wanted to just remind you that record keeping and incorporating it into your workflows isn't quick. Even with the resources that we've already created and shared for you guys, it's going to take time to make these really useful for you. You need to keep in mind that your town may have very specific business requirements that are going to extend your attention. And if you do, reach out to Steve. Let him know and talk it over with him because he may have some ideas and some tips. And we're not just talking about paper records here. We also have to manage our electronic as well. Better record keeping at the start will always help you in your day-to-day operations and will help you get that right information to the right person at the right time. If it's organized from the beginning, it's going to be a lot easier to leverage that chart that says where everything's located if you've been following it, and you can just easily hand that townsperson, yes, this is your appraisal, here you go. Finally, it's easier to do this project and these things when you have partners. So make sure that other listers in your office are helping out. And if you're the only lister in your office, make sure that the other staff are out there and they're aware of what you've been working on. Because maybe they'll want your advice. Maybe they'll want your help too. Okay. So thank you so much for listening to me talk about records management. I know it can be a little dry, and I apologize for my slide deck not being quite as, my script not being quite as solid as I thought that it was. But I know that there were some questions in the chat. So, okay, yes, okay. In the future, I will send the slide deck ahead of time, so that you guys can have it in front of you. So is there anything else? Oh, Steve, did you have a chance to look at what happens?
Great. So I did take a look at the legal requirements for tax appeal petitions. I didn't see anything that spoke specifically to withdrawn petitions. However, the retention has a completed closed point. So I would say once you have the notice that your petition or appeal has been withdrawn, that would make it completed closed. And then you would follow the retention, which I believe is 3 years after that.
I was going to say I don't see any more questions, but Stacy Bradley just asked, often enough we get slide presentations
Okay.
after. Oh, guess it's not a question. Okay.
Deanna, do you know if did we miss any other questions or?
No, there were no other questions yet in chat. But can we talk about what some of the downfalls would be about disposing of records without a policy?
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions or anything like that, we'll end here. Steve, when is the next open house that if folks are interested in either virtual or coming out to Middlesex.
Yes, so it's the third Tuesday of the month. So the next one will be on June 20th, and we do that in the afternoon. So it starts at 1:30.
And the first lunch and learn, would that be something that listers would?
Sure. So the first lunch and learn is going to cover a lot of what Meg discussed today. It's very much introduction to records management. What are the key statutes you need to be aware of? What is a record schedule? That sort of stuff. But if you are interested, we're doing that this coming Thursday at noon. It's completely virtual. And if you're interested, send me an email and I will add you to the list.
Okay. And that's open to any municipal official. So if you have a clerk that you think would benefit from this, or select board or anything like that, feel free to pass that along, that we are hosting these things. The question in the chat is, are board of listers able to create their own policy of lister record retention, or should or must they get approval of any policy from the select board? This is going to depend a little bit on the structure of your town. I believe that the board of listers are separate office, and unless you are like a appointed lister, which I don't think that's a thing, you wouldn't need to get official approval from the select board. However, you may want to go through that route just to make it more transparent to your residents about what's happening. Deanna, do you want to jump in? Save me.
Sure. So I was going to recommend, it is best practice to go to your select board and let them know that you've adopted a policy. But depending on what that dynamic might be, it may be more appropriate for you to warn a public meeting, letting the town know that you're going to be adopting a records retention policy. It may take you 5 minutes to adopt it, but at least then you're being transparent with the public. And it looks like we have a few more questions in the chat there for you, Megan.
Oh, okay, great. We can generate. Okay, so the question in the chat is if we can generate reports from a historical frozen grand list from software, is this considered a record that we should have a retention plan for? So if you are able to recreate a historical grand list on demand, then that would actually fall under the transitory record schedule, which is for records that are not required by law to be created or received. So it sounds like something that you would be creating for your own personal reference source or to help you do a workflow. So once you're done with that workflow, you could use the transitory schedule to throw that out once it's become obsolete. Remember, your grand list is officially going to be lodged with the town clerk, and that's going to be permanent. I think that Dana, you can, or Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but lister copies of that grand list are only, it's 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like per year you need to have about a 3-year window.
I think it's until superseded plus 3
Yes.
years, so technically I think it's 4.
Thank you, Deanna.
Yeah.
So what would I do without you? You just keep me honest. Okay, so cost sheets, for example, are they not kept until the next reappraisal? Also, pictures, sketches, are they to be new with each reappraisal? I don't know if they have to be. How long is obsolete? Okay, so a couple of different questions there. So whether or not they have to be new with each reappraisal, I think that's a thing, Deanna, you might be able to weigh in on whether they have to be new.
Sure. So the cost sheet, for example, is always going to be a new copy during reappraisal because the town is implementing new cost tables and new land schedules. So even if nothing has changed with the property, there's still going to be a new value.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. The sketches, if they're identical to, again, what they were previous to the reappraisal, there shouldn't be a need to resketch unless you are updating your software or for some reason the sketch becomes unattached to your CAMA program for some reason during that process.
And then obsolete is when you no longer administratively need it. So if you print something out for your reference to help you do a workflow, once you finish your workflow and you no longer need it, you can throw it in the shred or the recycle bin. I hope that helps. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, Deanna, is there anything that you want us to hit on or?
So the only thing that I try to hit home with listers is what is the potential liability of not having a policy and willy-nilly, discarding items. I know emails or post-it notes are less dangerous to dispose of as, say, the grand list in that first 3 years or, inventories, all the other fun stuff that we have on that sample policy and retention schedule that we created. But just explaining why legally it is important for folks to consider doing this.
Yeah. So it's not something that I like to really hit home on because it it scares people, and I don't know that having sticks is a great way to motivate. But there is a penalty for premature destruction of a record, either through negligence or accident, and that is $1,000 per record. So let's say that you cleared out your office and just threw out, let's say, 100 records. You're looking at quite a bit of money right there. Um, because it's each individual record that you destroy. You could be brought before, I believe it's the Superior Court, and charged $1,000 for each infraction. Um,
But, having a tangible policy that you've adopted, if someone comes in and asks for your working grand list or your abstract grand list from 1998, you can refer to this retention policy and say, "Per these disposition orders and the adopted policy, we disposed of these documents on X," and that is completely within their legal right. This is actually a great protection for towns to
yes,
have in case that, they haven't kept every working grand list by accident, say, Irene or a fire, those, horrible examples. Um, but
yeah.
to me, it's a safety net, and that's why I absolutely recommend that towns adopt them, whether they're clerk or lister.
Absolutely. So the records management policy really acts as a buffer to show good faith to the courts and to the public that you know what your responsibilities are, and if you can demonstrate that you regularly follow those, they're going to know that if you accidentally got rid of one thing or if you can't find it, that it was truly an accident and it wasn't an abdication or a malicious act, that you're just kind of trying to do your best. So that policy really is an insurance against much worse court actions, as Deanna is kind of pointing out. So thank you. I'm not 100% sure the comment about admin records. If you want to maybe email Steve, and kind of clarify, we can help you out with that. Um, Message above lister hearing and official meeting minutes. Yeah, so lister hearing records, those would be that open meeting requirements. So those would be permanent. But if you if you created minutes for that, those would be permanent. If you created a copy of the minutes, then you would retain those as a transitory record, that copy. And you could get rid of those whenever you no longer needed them. So I think if you want to maybe reach out to Steve with your question, we can maybe troubleshoot off the call.
I think that might be it.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to talk with you guys and for sticking it out through the conversation. We really appreciate your time. And if you do have any questions, definitely reach out to VSARA. We are more than happy to work with you individually. And Steve can now go out and visit your office and give you some advice. So definitely reach out if you've got questions. All right.